You know how we sometimes treat faith like it's an emergency hotline, something we only dial up when we're in real trouble? Well, that's exactly what we're digging into today, this idea of conditional faith. And our jumping-off point is this really haunting fragment of a Marathi poem about a divine being who feels like they're only remembered when a crisis hits. Okay, let's dive in.
So, just for a second, try to put yourself in those shoes. Imagine you're this timeless, all-present being, and you've watched humanity for ages, but you only ever hear from them when they're desperate. What would that feel like? It kind of frames our whole exploration today around this really powerful, empathetic puzzle.
And this is where the poem begins. It immediately sets a tone that's just vast and ancient. This isn't some fleeting frustration we're talking about. This is a sorrow that's been echoing through centuries, watching our patterns of remembering and, well, forgetting.
So from this divine perspective, how do we really show up? The poem gives us this fascinating, and maybe a little uncomfortable, list of all the different ways we humans choose to remember, or ignore, this presence in our lives.
First, it talks about being seen in a shop. Maybe as an idol you buy for a bit of good luck, very transactional. Then there's being cherished only in the mind, where it's a safe, abstract idea that you don't really have to engage with. And then there's the one that really hits hard. Some have never seen it all. Just complete and total neglect.
And this slide right here gets to the absolute heart of it. It's this wild contrast. On one side, the divine is described as being covered in dust, just completely forgotten. And on the other side, that same being is adorned with fragrant sandalwood and a crown. It's this insane whiplash between total neglect and over-the-top worship that really captures the inconsistency of it all.
So you gotta ask, right? Why are we like this? Why are we so all over the place? Well, the source material points us toward the Bhakti tradition, this amazing devotional movement that was all about a personal, emotional connection to God. And their answer? It's not that God is absent, it's that we have our own, very human limitations.
And the key concept here is a single word, Maya. Illusion. Think of it as our deep, almost primal attachment to the temporary, material stuff in the world. It's like this attachment puts a veil over our eyes, making us spiritually blind to the permanent, divine presence that's supposed to be everywhere.
And here's the direct consequence of getting tangled up in that Maya. The great Saint Tukaram, he put it so bluntly. He said that when we become a slave to the world, we don't just forget the divine, we actually cause our own immense sorrow. Our attachment is the very thing that makes us suffer.
But here's the thing. The Bhakti saints weren't just about pointing out the problem. They were super practical. They actually laid out a clear path for anyone who wanted to break out of this cycle of forgetting and remembering and build a real, authentic connection.
They broke it down into this four-part practice. It all starts with Namasmarana, which is just constant remembrance, keeping the divine in your thoughts always, not just when things go wrong. Then there's satsang, seeking out good, virtuous company. That's followed by Atmachintan, or deep self-reflection. And finally, it all culminates in Shananati, a state of just total surrender.
And what was so revolutionary about this? It's right here. The saints said that this practice, constant remembrance, wasn't some secret knowledge locked away in books. No, it was the essence of all scriptures, and it was open to everyone. It didn't matter who you were, your caste, your gender, your age. This was a radical idea that made faith accessible to all, a total game changer.
All right, so that's the devotional path. But that's not the only perspective out there, not by a long shot. The conversation gets way bigger and a lot more complicated when you bring in the voices of reason, rationalism, and even outright skepticism.
And this table does a great job laying out that whole spectrum. You've got the traditional Bhakti view of a merciful protector, but then you have rationalists like Savarkar, who saw God more as a primal force governed by rules. Then you have skeptics like P.L. Deshpande, who kind of saw God as a tool used by rulers to control people. And then there's this really interesting one, the atheist believer, someone who doesn't believe in a literal God, but still has faith in the wisdom of the saints.
Let's zoom in on the rationalist view for a second. Vinayak Damodar Savarkar was just scathing about this whole transactional faith thing. This idea of bargaining. If you do something good for me, I'll do a ritual for you. He called it utter foolishness. For him, it was all about understanding the rules of the universe and relying on human effort, not rituals.
And then you have the famous writer P.L. Deshpande with his sharp, skeptical take. He basically said, look, I was never interested in any of this stuff. And for him, the scientist who invented anesthesia to ease human pain was way more valuable than any saint. That is a powerful statement about prioritizing tangible, human progress.
Okay, so we've looked at the devotional path, and we've heard from the skeptics. With all these different ideas on the table, let's circle all the way back to that sorrowful voice from the poem we started with. How are we supposed to understand its lament now?
Well, the source material offers this beautiful way to reframe it. What if the divine sorrow isn't a complaint at all? What if it's not a sign of weakness? Instead, what if it's a mirror being held up to us, reflecting our own spiritual immaturity, our own tendency to treat the sacred like a transaction?
And when you look at it that way, the whole meaning shifts. The poem's sorrow isn't a lament anymore. It's an invitation. It's this profound call to action for us to evolve, to move beyond a faith of convenience and actually build a connection that's authentic, constant, and a real part of our lives.
And that brings us to our final, challenging question, a question that turns the lens right back on all of us. Is a crisis really necessary to remember? Or can we find a way, like the saint suggested, to cultivate that connection not just in times of trouble, but in times of peace too? Definitely something to think about.